So I'm Andrew Gray. I'm curator of herpetology at Manchester Museum, and when I was a child, I was really interested in animals. And if you'd asked me what I wanted to do then, it's probably what I'm doing now. When I was a kid, my mum used to check my pockets for worms and insects and things like that. And I've always kind of collected things really. And so yeah, we've got quite a large collection of amphibians at the museum. But my interest started, as I say, when I was really small. But even when I was sort of 9 and 10, I used to kind of go out into local parks, and rather than playing football, I'd be kind of down the ditch collecting newts and tadpoles, anything I could lay my hands on really. But I was just so interested in nature, and I still am. Over the weekend I was looking at badgers, at this badger set, which was fantastic. But yeah, amphibians in general have always been an interest, because I used to collect the little newts and the tadpoles. They were sort of the first things I kind of came across when I was a child. But now I get the opportunity to be able to travel with my work and to be able to go to some of the places where there's a massive variety of amphibians. The first time I went to South America, for instance, was a real eye-opener, and many of the frogs in our collection are actually from South and Central America. So when I first started at the museum, I actually had my own collection at home. Even before I started working at the museum, I used to keep them in a shed actually at home, because I wasn't allowed them in the house. And I used to have this little shed was sort of all insulated. It even had carpet in there, and we'd say like about old men having the sheds and everything and going in there. But this was wall-to-wall frogs, and I was doing a completely different job than I do now. I was actually in retail. But my interest in animals and just studying them, and I used to collect native species, study them for a while and then release them. But that led on to looking at tropical species, and I had a really good collection. I used to communicate with people abroad, and I was given tadpoles from people. One species was a species of Mexican leaf frog, and that were the first ones to have been collected and bred, and actually bred them in my greenhouse in Lancashire rather than in Mexico. And it was up to 40 degrees the temperature in there, but they loved it. They absolutely loved it. So I had this collection, and when I first started at the museum, one of the things that I said I'd like to be able to do was actually get involved in conservation and use the frogs as an educational resource. So it was encouraged. I brought my animals in. We only had, as I say, one frog in the collection before I started. But many of the frogs that we've got, many of the frogs that I had from the original collection are nocturnal, so they don't really lend themselves to being on display. So we started keeping them in the back of the department, and it sort of initiated a little bit of research. We got students involved from the university to start working on how we could actually keep them better. We looked at the diet. We've looked at the conditions to keep them in optimum conditions, so that when we actually do keep them, we're keeping them 100% right. We collect some of the data from the field when we go out to places like Costa Rica and where these animals occur, and now the students are really embedded in that, really involved in collecting information when they go on field courses and studying and the frogs in the wild. But one of the things that we do as far as research is we always make sure that there's no harm to the frogs. When we say research, it's all non-invasive, it's all behavioural, or studying them to see how it affects them so that we can keep them better. So one particular group of frogs that we keep at the museum that's developed into one of the largest collections of these particular frogs in the world are a group of frogs called Phyllomedusine frogs. They're linked to leaves. Their common name is leaf frogs, and they actually sit on the leaves, which gives them the common name. But they also could be named after a leaf frog because they actually lay their eggs on leaves that overhang water to stop the eggs from being eaten by fish. The tadpoles then develop in the eggs, and then they drop in the water to start their life. And we have them on display. Even the tadpoles are on display in the museum. But these particular frogs, they've got really unusual adaptations that set them apart from many other tree frogs. They've got vertical pupils in their eyes, they've got pigments in the skin to help protect themselves, and they're able to sit in, bask in high sunlight in the areas that they live in. So we have to mimic that in captivity, and it's very good to focus. If you can start collecting, but you've got to have a real focus to do anything useful and real. From a zoological point of view, you've got to focus down. We focus down on some of the most critically endangered frogs, including these leaf frogs. So I'd like to show you some. We're actually, at the moment, we're actually redeveloping the museum, but I'd like to show you some that we've got just off display. So these down here. We're going to pop down here. These are a red-eyed leaf frog. Now these aren't as endangered as many of the other frogs we've got, but the typical leaf frogs, because what they do is they actually sit on the leaves here. You can see there's one there and there's actually one on the back there. So they utilise the leaves really, really well, and they're very well camouflaged. They use the camouflage during the day. Even the light levels can help them to change colour. So this one's changed to match the leaf colour below, a little bit lighter than the one on the back there, and on this side. But when we wake them up, they actually change, because normally they'll be sat fast asleep during the day, and if a predator came along and woke them up, then they wake up and they show the bright colours. And this is a species that occurs from Mexico all the way through to Panama. You see this one on posters and things like that because it's got these beautiful bright colours. It's got very long legs, like the lemur leaf frog, and it's got these beautiful red eyes, bright orange feet. And it uses these to startle a predator. What it would do is it would stay tucked away, but if anybody disturbs it during the day, it opens its eyes up, shows its bright colours, and then it jumps. And as it jumps and lands, it closes up again, and the predator's left looking for a brightly coloured frog. It kind of no longer exists. So it's a pretty cool strategy. But they're amazing frogs, and people say, why, you know, they think I'm a bit weird, kind of into frogs, but when they actually see these frogs and they see how beautiful they are, then they can kind of understand why I'd be interested in collecting them. But it's not just about the colours and how beautiful they are, it's really about how important it is to conserve them. And some of the other species that we've got in the collection are actually very critically endangered, including one species called the lemur leaf frog, which now only occurs at 1 or 2 sites in Costa Rica. So when I collected things as a boy, I used to collect lots of different things. I'd even collect the tracks of the animals in little plaster casts and things like that. But that collecting and actual interest in nature, and even now, I was in Corfu last week, and actually, you know, there's beautiful butterflies there, there was shed skin of a snake, so all these things that connect to nature, I'm just interested in collecting as well, and they kind of give you a bit of an insight into how the animals live. But, you know, a lot of people collect and they're kind of almost like stamp collectors. They want to finish off the series. But for me, it's always been about finding out about the animals. I collect them just so that I can study them, and there's got to be a reason for it. And, you know, the idea of collecting when I was little and actually being, you know, I think that is actually ingrained in me. The fact that, you know, through collecting you can learn so much about the environment and about the animals concerned. So, you know, it's kind of probably inevitable that I've ended up where I am, kind of now focusing down on conserving some of these very, very rare frogs for the future. A lot of these species are actually under threat, and there's one particular frog that's quite iconic. It's called the golden toad. Bright orange frog, absolutely stunning. It only occurred in one little area in Monteverde rainforest in Costa Rica. And there's many of these frogs, and people used to go there and see them. And one year there was 1,500 of these breeding en masse. And although they were endangered and they were thought to be in danger of depleting further the population, nobody actually realised how critically endangered these frogs were, and the fact that things can happen really, really quickly in the tropics. Basically, nobody collected any of these frogs, and within a year they were completely gone. One year there was 1,500, next year there was none. They disappeared within a year, and they've never ever been seen since. So if somebody had collected some of those tadpoles, then at least there would still be some around, and we could maybe reintroduce them, or at least there'd still be some. They wouldn't be extinct. So with that in mind, we've been working with the Costa Rican authorities to actually protect many other different Costa Rican amphibians that are critically endangered, where the same thing, where the populations have started to diminish. And one that's very close to my heart is a species called the lemur leaf frog. I was given special permission to collect and bring back some tadpoles to Manchester, and we actually bred 400 of these frogs. They're absolutely stunning frogs, and we're protecting them in the wild, but had it not been for that, then there wouldn't be any in captivity. And it's just nice to know that, you know, if anything happened like the same thing as the golden toad, and these frogs do disappear in the wild, there's various different things that are affecting them. There's funguses, there's changing in the environment, and a lot of it's down to humans. We're actually changing the environment faster than the frogs can adapt. So we've got a responsibility really to do something about that. And I think that things like captive breeding and collecting these animals for real genuine ethical purposes, and also for education. A lot of the kids that come to Manchester never get the opportunity to see any of these animals, and had we not collected them, they would never ever get that experience. So this particular type of leaf frog has got a really nice name. It's actually called a splendid leaf frog, and its Latin name is Calcarifer, Agalicnis calcarifer, Cruzio-hyla calcarifer as it's now known. But it's named Calcarifer after these little flanges, these little fringes on the end of its legs here, and it's sort of on the elbows there, and they're called calcas, and that's what gives it its Latin name. But it's got these bright yellow eyes, these beautiful sort of bars down the side there, almost like tiger stripe bars, and it actually uses its legs. Its legs are very, very flat if you look from the side there, and it actually uses its legs to semaphore. It uses its legs to flag like this, and because it's got such a very, very soft call. And that's how we normally find frogs in the wild, it's from the call. But this particular species, it took me 5 years to actually find the first one. Up until then there was only 20 museum specimens worldwide in jars. So I worked with this, and it was a hell of a trip to actually get this species. Finally, after 5 years, I went into the Talamanca mountain range, and I found a tree hole that had been filled with water, which is where this particular species lays its eggs rather than on leaves. But we brought them back to Manchester. We described the call, the leg waving behaviour, and we set up them for breeding. We managed to breed them for the first time in the world. We've now bred over 40 of them, and we've sent them out to various different zoos worldwide, in America, in Canada, and also Bristol Zoo have got some of these now from us. So this particular species of leaf frog that we collected for a very special reason. And the reason behind this was actually one of the BBC David Attenborough programmes. It was a programme called Planet Earth, and the producers wanted to film this particular species for the very first time. It had never been filmed. It's a very rare species, and I found it at about 4 sites in Costa Rica. They live under the leaves here, typical of most leaf frogs. But unlike some other frogs, this particular species has got huge webbing on its back legs, on its back feet, and also, hopefully you can see that there, it's got this huge amount of webbing there, but it also has it on its front feet as well. Now this isn't for swimming, this is actually for jumping, and these are a gliding frog. They glide from the treetops when they're ready for breeding. They come down. This is a little male, and it had never been captured before. So we took the film crew out. I was employed as a scientific advisor for the programme. We took them out to Costa Rica, back to one of these sites, and these frogs only breed on a full moon, so it's extremely difficult to find them any other time. But we got there just in time, and whoop, you can see how good they are at jumping, and we filmed them. It was absolutely amazing. Right at the full moon we had about, well over 200-300 specimens gliding down. One actually landed on my head, which is pretty cool. And we got some amazing footage using the new high definition cameras that they're using now for the series. But they wanted to film them in the studio as well. We wanted to get some high speed shots of them gliding down because they're very difficult in the field. So we brought a few tadpoles back to Manchester. We developed them into the frogs, and we took them down to Bristol to film them over fans. And as soon as you put one over a fan, it adopts this gliding position, and we could turn the fans up and down and actually have the frogs going up and down in slow motion, which is how we got the footage for that particular programme. Hope it doesn't spoil it for anybody, but that's how we got it, and that was from this particular species. We also had them in our Amazon exhibit, and due to the fact that that particular exhibit mimics the wild so well, and as I said before, these frogs only breed at very, very specific times and conditions, but because that exhibit was exactly the same as they would find in the wild, they'd actually laid their eggs, and we bred them in the Amazon tank for the first time in the world. We got recognition for our Amazon tank in respect of that. But they're amazing species, and they're cool to see in captivity as well as in the wild.